Maybe I'll go backwards.
Sounds great.
Because as I entered my 88th decade, life is different. And I'm dealing with how is life going to be? I can't do the things I used to do. I can't do the things I would necessarily like to do. And so I have to look back and see what God has done in the past. And He has done amazing things. It was never in the last, since the 70s probably. My life is different than it was prior to that. I went to a Christian school. I was brought up in a Christian family. Not without problems, but I was brought up in a Christian family. And my dad always wanted me to go to college. He wanted me to be a teacher. And after I got finished with high school, and I had paid my way through Grand Rapids Christian High, I decided I didn't want to work anymore and go to school. I was engaged, and so marriage was going to be the next thing on my docket. And your grandpa went to Germany with the military, and during the year that he was gone, our family just sort of was in an upheaval. And my sister, who was just younger than I, got pregnant, so we had a fast wedding in the living room of our home. Prior to that, my maternal grandma and my paternal grandfather both died in the same week. One on Sunday and one on Wednesday. And that was the rest of the grandparents that I had. So we decided to get married. And Grandpa came home on leave, and we set our wedding day for July 2nd. And he came home on the end of June, the Saturday before that. So I was in charge of getting everything together for this wedding, which was not my cup of tea, but I did it. He came home, we got married on the 2nd of July. We spent part of our time, went up to Quamanon Falls. That was the last year before the bridge opened, the Mackinac Bridge. So we had to take a ferry across to go over there and could see the final steps on the bridge that was being done. I never camped in my life. We went camping. I didn't know how to cook on a cook stove. I didn't know how to cook, period. So Grandpa did it all. It was cold that week, even though it was the 4th of July. And so that was how our married life began. Then I went back to Germany with him. And I lived there until February of the following year. Berlin Wall was still up, and so they would go on active duty periodically, maneuvers they called it. And I would be left alone. We lived on the German economy because he was only a PFC and we couldn't live on the base. He worked in a hospital in the admitting office, only because he could type. When he got to Germany, they needed someone that knew how to type, and he knew how to type with 3 fingers on each hand. And instead of doing light bulbs and maintenance, they put him in the office. And so he had a couple of good German friends that we also lived with. We had 3 rooms. We had one room that we lived in was our main room, and we shared the bathroom, and the kitchen was another couple. Which was interesting. No heat in the bathroom. No hot running water. So if you wanted to have hot, he used a tea kettle every day to have hot water so he could shave. And military pay at that time was not so much. And so there was a time when we had another week before payday, and we didn't have any money, we didn't have any food. And your great-grandma sent a letter, and she had $10 in there for us. And so God always provides. So that's sort of how we started life. And we lived in Grand Rapids until 1970, and we bought the family homestead out here. Remodeled it, gutted it, right out to the bare walls. There was no insulation in it. We changed churches. We went to church in Grand Rapids at Emmanuel Reformed and decided that was just too far. The kids were ready to be in youth group, and Sunday nights bringing them back to Grand Rapids was just... So we asked them, we said, so where would you like to go? You want to go to church in Belding or you want to go to Grand Rapids? And they voted. And they decided they wanted to go to church in Belding. So it was a mission church. And then they wanted another organist. And they knew I played the piano. So they said, if we pay for organ lessons for you, will you learn to play the organ? So I did. I mean, that was not in my plan. In the meantime, while we were still in Grand Rapids, I sang in the choir, and there were ladies in the choir that were talking about this Bible study that they were going to at Central Reformed Church in Grand Rapids. And I thought, man, that sounds really good. I'd like to go to a Bible study, but I don't drive, so how am I going to get there? Well, then after we were in Belding Church for a while, a couple came, and she had been in Bible study fellowship. And by that time, I knew how to drive a car. So she said, if I can get us into class, would you like to go? And I said, yeah, I would. So in November of, I can't tell you which year, 74, I think, we went to an introduction class, which they had back then. And I thought, this sounds really good. They were studying the history of Israel and the minor prophets, which was a little deep, but anyway. We did that, and we got in. And so I'm in BSF. Drove every day because she couldn't drive because they didn't have two vehicles, and so I'd pick her up. She'd bring a thermos of coffee, which I never drank coffee. That's when I learned to drink coffee. And we drove, and that sort of got me hooked on Bible Study Fellowship. And I received a phone call from the person who was going to be the teaching leader of the class that was going to be on the north end of Grand Rapids. And she asked me if I would pray about being a children's leader. So now I have to make a decision. Do I want to, what does God want me to do? And I felt he wanted me to be a children's leader, but children and I were not. We didn't connect a whole lot because my kids were growing up by that time. And Grandpa had just joined the Gideons about the same time I started BSF. And he said, and I want you to be a part of the auxiliary. And I'm like, I don't want to be a part of the auxiliary. But I joined anyway, just to be obedient to my husband. And I got to the first monthly meeting, and the lady that was in charge of the women looked at me and she said, you'll make a good president. And I'm like, I don't do president, So every month when we went to our Gideon camp meeting, I had a splitting headache. My stomach was upset, but I was president. Okay, I had no idea what I was doing, but I was president. Grandpa was just enjoying the Gideons. He enjoyed the Saturday morning prayer meeting, and it just strengthened his spiritual walk. In the meantime, the Lord's hammering me with the Gideons, and he's hammering me with Bible Study Fellowship. And I was enjoying the Bible study, I really was. Because there had been times when we lived in Grand Rapids and they would have women come in and speak. And I always had that yearning in my heart that I wanted something deeper. I wanted it to be like the people that were speaking. I wanted to be that kind of a woman. And so God, in his mysterious ways, just took us bang, bang, bang from one thing to another. And we were in the Gideons maybe a year and a half. And a faithful Gideon, Dave Lucart, was one that was instrumental in bringing Grandpa along. And of course, being his wife, I just sort of went along with him. And he said to me one time, he said, someday you'll be international president. And I just laughed in his face. I'm going, you've got to be kidding me. I don't do that kind of stuff. In the meantime, we discovered that Grandpa's office girl had been embezzling his money. And when I went to headquarters to be trained as a teaching leader, I was heavy-hearted because we had found out that she had embezzled close to $1 million. And so we were in debt. But I went anyway, and I got to the leaders' meeting, which every class has, at headquarters, never having been a leader, discussion leader. And no, it wasn't Rosemary, it was Pearl Jensen. She looked at me and she said, "You can lead first day's questions." And I'm going, "Really? I've never done this in my life." So I led the first day's questions and spent my time there, was trained. Rosemary Jensen confirmed that I was fit to be a teaching leader, and gave everyone that was trained that week a verse from Scripture when we had our final dinner. And the verse she gave to me was Zephaniah 3:18, I think, where it says, the Lord your God is in the midst of you. He joys over you with singing. And I never remember reading that verse before, but music is something that speaks to my heart a lot. And I was overwhelmed. And then she interviewed us before we went home, and she said, this was in September, she said, "You are not to start teaching at least for 3 weeks," because she knew what was going on in my life. And so I didn't start teaching right away. But the first study I taught was the Gospel of John. And for 5 years, I taught Bible study fellowship. And Grandpa had been elected in the meantime to the International Gideon Cabinet. And he needed to replace what they called an International Auxiliary Cabinet representative. And he felt out of the 4 states that his wife was the only one that was qualified to do that. And I'm going, are you kidding me? Yeah, no. So he put my name in, and I was suddenly an International Auxiliary Cabinet representative, and that sort of conflicted with being a teaching leader. But I didn't just end Bible study fellowship, because in the meantime, the area advisor was the teaching leader that had taught before me, and she needed somebody to fill in and be the children's area coordinator for BSF, which means we had 14 classes that we visited. And I felt that's what the Lord wanted me to do, and so I left my teaching role and I joined the area team. And I did that for 3 years, and then she needed to have an area class administrator. And so for the next 18, 20 years, I was an area class administrator and visited classes on a regular basis. In the meantime, I went from being a cabinet representative to being the auxiliary international chaplain, to being vice president, to being president. And I didn't go to college. I didn't speak in front of people. When you give lectures, you have to know what you're talking about. When you're an officer, you have cabinet meetings. So I began to travel by myself. And God provides. He says, when I call you, I will equip you. And so what can I do but do what he wants me to do? And so that's sort of what he did. He equipped me to do what he wanted me to do, and I felt fulfilled in those roles. When I had polio when I was 14, my dad said to me, "That's when the Lord got a hold of you and broke your strong will." I was a strong-willed child, and that did make a difference. He must have been able to see a difference, because I was at Mary Free Bed for 3 months, and when I first went there, after I had an ambulance ride to Butterworth first, and I was there for a week, and it was in the fall, which is not the season that people got polio, but I did. And I remember there was a little boy in the same room with me, and he was 7, 8 years old maybe. And he would talk to me and he would say, I'm going to marry you someday. And I'm 14 years old, you know. But at Mary Freebed, I lived in a dormitory room, so there were 10 of us. And some had had polio, and one of them was an amputee, one of them had spina bifida. And there they had a really routine where every day you went and you had hot packs that they would take you down to a room, and they put these hot packs that were wet wool on your back. You'd lay on your stomach, and then they'd put plastic over the top, and they'd change them a couple times before the therapist would come and work with you. But I couldn't sit up in my bed. My bed was flat like this. And they wanted me to learn what to write with my left hand because it was my right arm that was affected, and I refused. They wanted me to take classes, and I refused. But learning to eat laying down and not being able to get out of bed to walk around using a bedpan, it's just God moved in different ways in my life to get me to be who He wanted me to be. Going back to school wearing a brace and being a freshman in high school. And, you know, unbeknownst to me, but the senior boys would go around behind me because I had an airplane split that had my arm up like this, you know. And so I didn't have a real good self-image. I had a very poor self-image for a number of years. And after I was on the cabinet for the Gideons, God finally revealed that to me, that the poor self-image was not good, and that I could share this with women. And I remember a state convention, I can't tell you which one it was, but I spoke about the fact that, you know, as God's children, we are His children, we're special, that the poor self-image is a bad thing. And because of God's grace, we don't have to live that way. And so I shared that during my luncheon message. I don't remember what the topic was on, but I remember 2 different women came up to me after the luncheon and thanked me for sharing. And so God just, I don't know, He just brings people periodically into your life. Or He has a place where He wants you to go, and so He, you know, goes like this. But when you become 70, you have to retire at BSF from your job. And so I did. And prior to that, Lyle had died of a hemorrhagic stroke. And so I was also a widow, and I was in a new position. And He moves in mysterious ways. Because I knew that Grandpa, after he had his brain hemorrhage, I knew he wasn't going to live. When we turned around and went back and we met Aunt Kathy, and then they told me they were taking him to Grand Rapids, I knew that was it. He just revealed that to me 2 days before that. I had been praying for the auxiliary widows, and when I got finished, after I prayed for the ones for that day, I said, Lord, I don't know these ladies, but You do, and You know what they need. And I got up from my couch, and it was like, you'll know real soon. And so it wasn't a surprise. It was just, I don't know, it's kind of eerie, but yes, but it also is a preparation that He allows me to have. And sometimes it's scary. And sometimes I think about, okay, God, where are You leading me now? At my age, do You still have a purpose? And I can't do what I did before. I'm not able to get around as easily. The body sort of wears out after a while. but he's still always faithful, and he always gives me unexpected surprises. It's been wonderful to see my grandchildren growing up, getting married. I'm now a great-grandma. That's a fun thing. He's just good all the time. And I'm just delighted to think that he could use me. And I want to be faithful till the end. I don't want to, wilt out. I sing a hymn every morning out of a book that I have, and I read the hymn story. And how often the hymn I've sung connects with the devotional thought is amazing. And those are the days that God is really speaking to me. I can tell that. There are other times when I feel like I'm wandering around in the, morass of life. If I was going to write what my life would be like, those were not things that were. But like I said, I didn't really have a plan either. I just let God do his thing. And then I sit back and I'm overwhelmed by what he's done, what he's allowed me to do. And I still have people that come up to me and say, I remember when you were the teaching leader. In fact, I had that this past year at the end of the year. One of the women in the small group I was in, came up to me and she said, do you know that you were my first teaching leader? And I'm like, what do you do with that? I was at the convention and I had a man come up to me, the state convention for the Gideons. And he was on the Auxiliary Advisory Committee when I was the international president. And we were going through some really rough times as the cabinet. And I was getting into trouble with all people at the higher level. And he still remembers that. So his wife, they had come up to the convention because she was going to speak at the luncheon. And he said, all the way up here we kept saying, I wonder if Judy Weeks will be at the convention. I hope she's going to be at the convention. And, that's overwhelming to me. I guess I don't want to really be notorious. I don't know. I just don't expect that, I guess. I don't expect, Scripture said, don't seek the praise of man, you want the praise of God. And so I have to just give it back to him and say thank you that you could use my life. I remember way back, maybe when we were early married, they had this woman that came to sing at Emmanuel Church, which is where we went. And she was blind. And she sang the hymn, It's Not an Easy Road for Traveling to Heaven. For many are the thorns on the way. It's not an easy road, but Jesus walks beside me. His presence gives us joy every day. And then the chorus was, no, it's not an easy road. No, it's not an easy road. And it was just, and every once in a while that song will come to mind. And I thought, she was blind. She was probably in her 50s maybe. And it's not. And the thorns are on the way. And all the other stuff that God has to take out of your life and he puts into your life.
So you said it's, the hard road with thorns along the way. Worth it?
Yes. And you can sing the song, It Will Be Worth It All when we see Jesus. One glimpse of his dear face, all glory, or all trials, or however it goes, will erase. So gladly run the race,